All right. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Leverage Lab's third webinar in our monthly C-Series webinar, C-Suite webinar series, excuse me. I'm Jake Hunley, and again, I'm returning as your moderator. If you've been to the last two webinars, you'll recognize our host, Anne-Marie Wills, our own CEO and 20-year media industry veteran, and John French, who has served in top positions of leading media companies such as Penton Media. However, on this special webinar, they're also joined by Joe Cantu, the VP of Digital Marketing at Fusible. We wanted to bring Joe on not to just hear it from our mouths, but from someone with a proven track record in driving successful digital marketing strategies for industry giants. Today, they'll be discussing how to elevate your organization's sales games in a data-oriented world. That means understanding what B2B media buyers are looking for and what they are challenged with, as well as how to address those objections and influence their media budgets to your publication's audience. During the webinar, I do encourage all of you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. I'll stick around in the background to answer any questions during the webinar or let our hosts answer them at the end. With all that being said, I'll turn it over to our hosts.
Thank you, Jake. As we always do with every webinar, we just take a quick second to update everybody and give everybody a little bit of a perspective on Leverage Lab and where we're coming from when we bring this webinar series to you. So Leverage Lab is a revenue partner to B2B and B2C media companies, and we exist to bring new revenue to our partners through leveraging their rich audience data. And we bring the whole solution. We're first-party data infrastructure. We bring that solutioning. We have pre-built campaign programs that are driving new revenue very swiftly. We've got sales training and enablement to help make sure that those programs are really sold through into your markets, and deep and rich reporting and analytics. So our whole goal in life is to get you into revenue quickly. I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to lead the bulk of the conversation today. So John, let's talk about the agenda.
Thank you. I'm proving to the world that I know when to put my camera on, when not to. Sorry about that, guys, but now I'm back on. The agenda is it's quick moving. As we said in previous webinars, it's 30 minutes. We attack one subject. And as Jake mentioned, we have a special guest. So I'm going to speak for a couple of slides, and then we'll go over to talk to Joe. The sales world is changing. Quality is much more important than quantity when it comes to digital marketing. I'll talk a little bit about sales compensation plans, and then we'll have some summary and questions. I chose this slide because it's confusing. And the reason it's confusing is there's a lot of things going on here. And I think what it represents is where, and for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be talking a lot, if not exclusively, about the salespeople in your companies, in B2B, even B2C, that sell these digital products to companies and buyers. And they must be confused. I talked to a lot of salespeople, and it was a real transition for a lot of them to move truly into a digital world. And it was a little bit easier eventually because the technology became a little simpler to understand and to sell that to a customer. But now it's really starting to speed up. And I chose that phrase. It's an old phrase when I was the CEO of Cygnus back in 2009. That was also a period of change and also a really bad recession. And so we adapted that phrase as our subtitle or motto, which is the world is changing very fast. And I think it's the case here. And we'll take a look at a few numbers to prove that. So next slide. Thank you. You can tell I'm not running the slides, which is good for everyone. As I mentioned earlier, the quality rules over quantity, and that is becoming accelerated. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. If we go back a couple of years during COVID, 2019 was actually a pretty good year for media, but it was a very good year for events. And all of us were providing leads to our customers, and a good chunk of them were from the events or what was related around the events, even though they may have been digital products. And then, of course, in February 2020, everything stops. There are no live events. And most B2B companies actually did a pretty good job adjusting to that. What we leaned into is that quantity. If you're not getting the leads that you got from our events, don't worry about it. We'll create online online trade shows, digital trade shows, forums, all kinds of products to make sure that we fed you as many leads as possible. I liken it to the difference between fast food, right? And volume is more important than quality, as opposed to gourmet, where the quality is much more important than the quantity. So if you look at, if you come forward another year or two, I talked to a lot of publishers. And last year, Q1 and Q2 started off really not that great. And there was some, and I'm talking mainly digital advertising, there was some rebound in the second half, but not enough to make up for the first 2 quarters. So what caused that? What's going on in the marketplace? So we're going to take a look at some numbers here. And you can see up in the right-hand corner, it's Media Radar. My friend Todd, who's the founder and CEO of Media Radar, gave us these slides to use. He actually presented them at BIMS in New Orleans. If you're not familiar with Media Radar, I would also recommend that you contact them, because they got great market share data information. So what is this thing telling us? And why sometimes the salespeople are confused as I went through that first slide. Part of it is these are buyers. These are active buyers in the last 12 months or all of 2023. And if you look at people who are buying webinars and white papers, they're not exclusive. So what does that mean? What that means is they're buying a white paper from you or from your competition or a webinar, but they're also buying all kinds of other things. So the same thing is the case for email ads, the same thing for print, and there's still print left. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but also the same thing for native ads and displays, and not exclusive. So the whole idea of cross-channel in 360 is, again, picking up and accelerating. This is a slide I absolutely love, because we talk about white papers and webinars, and you remember the past slide, 92 or 91% buy that plus a whole bunch of other things. 51% say white papers deliver the best results. That's pretty strong. And I think what's happening now, we're going to morph into a more video world. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But the average return on investment is 3 to 1. So every dollar they spend on white papers, they return value of 3 times that. I think that's an easy sales proposition. Some salespeople are comfortable selling white papers or any type of content, and many are not. And that's what needs to be changed, or they need to be trained for that. If you look at the 51% say webinars are the strongest marketing channel, no surprise. I mean, you guys are on this webinar, and we know how effective they are. And they say that webinars are key to their marketing strategy. So we're going to take a look at a few examples of that as well. You're familiar with the company Red Hat, and I found this absolutely amazing. If you look at Red Hat, they're basically a vendor, software vendor of building cloud and cloud architecture and platforms and things like that. So big ticket items, all expense behind it and technologies and stuff like that. 62% of their total budget last year went to Facebook and Instagram. Now let's put that in perspective. If 62% went, and you put those numbers together, and conveniently they come up to 9 million. If you do the math, their total spend last year was $14 million. And of that $14 million, 9 of it didn't go to digital. It went to social media platforms. And there's a way of doing that, even if you are a B2B publisher.
John, I was just remembering that when Todd at Media Radar presented this, he also mentioned that 10% of all social media advertising today is B2B. And
Yes.
I think that that's just like an amazing stat, because I remember the days when, B2B marketers would say, no, my market's not in Meta, my market's not on social, but they are, and the money's there as well.
Well, and not only that, Anne-Marie, as I mentioned earlier, these are not, this is a big company, it's expensive products. We would never relate that expensive product to Facebook. No, yeah. It was always LinkedIn, and that whole debate still rages back and forth. That's a great point. Thank you. One of the things we wanted to point out here, and this is last year, the events are back, certainly. 63% of all B2B buyers are investing in events. But look at the world in the last 12 months. It's beginning to change. Events are important. Still, print is hanging around, display, email. But the areas of native and white papers and webinars and mobile, and the OLB, by the way, is online video. We expect those last 3 or 4 to start getting larger, and the events are not going to get less. but I think there's going to be a better share of those going forward. One of the things to consider, and again, in talking to Todd the other day, he has people or companies that are more consumer or B2C, excuse me, but some of them, this is this publisher or the media company, some of them 80 to 90%, 89 to 90% of their digital product sell is in video. And the reason that's coming back, and it's going to hit B2B very soon. It used to be if you were a John Deere or a Monsanto or some really big company, you had a lot of video. But then you got those middle tier to smaller companies that didn't have the video, didn't have the money to do that. So it was really dominated by the big players. With the advent of the technology to produce videos today, the cost of doing that is coming down dramatically. And then if you mix in AI and the ability to create video, then all of a sudden, anyone could be a video producer. Any company could be running video. So we think it's important that the salespeople are trained, not so much for the first 2 or 3 of these, but be ready for the rest of them. And as they increase in their volume. Okay, so all of that being said, the salespeople have to learn all this new stuff, and you have to make sure that you're producing the products that are different, that are more video, more white papers, more webinars, and also more complex social media based campaigns. And all of that is complex enough, but then what do the sales compensation plans look like for your folks, and how do they measure up? You know, one of the things I've recommended and I've done in the past, in this case, take the past year, and you've got all your sales data in, and you've got your sales and commission structures already put together, already run last year. I would take those and then kind of overlay them on what you expect and how many new products you expect to release this year that are different than you did last year. So are they compensated properly? And the question is, in doing so, say the best salesperson you've got in your organization grabs onto this, runs with it, and just does a heck of a job selling all these new products that are based on the fact that there will not be cookies in the future, that first party data is king, that quantity is not as important as quality, and a lot of these campaigns are going to be social media based. All of that, if that salesperson did all of that 100%, would they make more money or less money? And of course, if they would make less money, then I would encourage you strongly to take a look at your sales compensation plans and match them up against the products that you want to release this year. Okay, so we got a couple of takeaways before we go talk to Joe. The takeaways I would say this is strictly about the salespeople and your relationship to the salespeople. Big question here. Would you rehire your whole sales team today if you had the opportunity? You know, several years ago, I used to run a series, what they call revenue roundtables. And we were in New York, and I did it for SIA, and I have a bunch, usually like 6 or 8 sales leaders. Usually they were sales managers, they were publishers, they were show directors, but they were in charge of sales people. And we'd sit around for a couple hours and we'd have lunch and we'd have different topics, and they would learn from peer learning, they would learn from each other. But halfway into it, once I got everybody, I thought everybody was relaxed and everybody's open, and there's no competitors, by the way. It's not competitive markets. I would ask them that question. I said, okay, I got a question for you. Look at your salespeople today. If you had an opportunity tonight to fire all and tomorrow morning to hire them back, how many would you hire back? And I got to tell you, it amazed me. Every time I did it, which is a dozen times or more, it always came down to the same percentage. So my partner, Anne-Marie, what do you think that percentage was?
I'm going to go with the Pareto 80-20 rule.
Okay.
The 80%, keep 20.
Ooh, you're a little tougher than they are. Joe, what do you think?
I'll say 50-50.
The answer was, believe it or not, straight across the line, all industries, it was amazing, about 1/3. So they would rehire. So I said, that is crazy. And everybody's kind of shaking their head saying, yep, you're right, it's crazy. And I'd say, why would you do that? You're the sales leader. it's too hard to get rid of them, to retrain someone. There's politics in the company. There was a lot of reasons, but what it really came down to is if this was a football game, you're running out in the field with only 4 people, and that doesn't work. So I would encourage you to take a look at your salespeople against the matrix that we just put together and all the complexities and the changing market share and all that stuff, and see if they're up to snuff. The next one I would say, what was the last time you overhauled the sales compensation plans? We talked about that a little bit. I won't spend too much time on it, but I've spent a good chunk of my career for several companies, actually, even when I was, I was a CEO, but also where I'm advising companies. They've asked me to come in and rewrite their sales compensation plans. It's complex, but it's not. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. Next, I would do is ask your salespeople, what are the top 3 reasons why a customer says no? Then separate that list into technology mismatch or lack of sales knowledge. Now, what does that mean? That means if people are saying no to your salespeople in the digital world, it's usually come down to 2 things: technology mismatch, which is it isn't the right product for them. It doesn't meet their goals. They don't know the technology. They're not sophisticated enough on their own, or lack of sales knowledge. And I would say that most of the times I've seen is the lack of sales knowledge is usually the majority of the reason. And the reason behind that, again, it goes back to the second point I wanted to make is ask your salespeople if they have the confidence to sell beyond banners and leads. You would be surprised, how honest they will be. I've done that many times. I've encouraged people to do that, and they salespeople open up. Why are we running around?
Sorry, that's my dad.
No problem. But salespeople actually open up and they go, and they say, you know what? I'm glad you asked the question. Sometimes they want you to ask that question, and even the best of salespeople don't want to look weak in front of their boss. But ask them the question, find out what they need to know, and then train them. And then I would say the last thing on this before we turn to Joe, is that what about you? Do you truly understand how things have and will continue to shift? You're the leader. People look to you, and I would be honest in looking at that. And just the fact that you guys are on this webinar based on the subject matter certainly proves to us that you do want to know that. But there are a lot of people in this industry, frankly, when it comes to technology, and I'm talking leaders, that kind of fake it a little bit and don't know the technology as well as they should. And it's difficult to do that and then ask the people who work for you, who sell for you, to be experts if you're not. So we're going to have some questions at the end of all this, but right now I'd like to turn to Joe, as Jake mentioned. And Joe and I have worked together in the past last year. Those of us who have been around the industry for a while realize that Fusible is a nice name, but Fusible is actually the new name of Rand O'Reilly. So if anyone's out there and hasn't seen that announcement, it's Rand O'Reilly, and it's a great company. So Joe, welcome as a guest to what we affectionately call the Growth Lab. And I'd like to ask you a few questions. And we'll get 3 or 4 questions to get things going, but we'd love the audience to ask as well. Today being opening day for baseball, if this was baseball, what inning are you in the whole change that you've enacted with Fusible? And a big part of that is training the sales force. So it's a baseball game. What inning are you in?
Yeah. So I'd have to say I'm probably the 3rd or 4th inning. So, extending kind of the baseball analogy, if I would think of it as, first inning, we're just trying to get out there, get a little warmed up. We're figuring out where the wind is blowing, things like that. Just seeing how we feel that day, getting a sense of our strategy, where we're strong, where we're weak. Second inning, we've all had our top of the lineup, go up to plate. We're figuring out, hey, we're messing with the curveball, that sort of thing. And then the 3rd inning, you start to figure out, all right, here's what we need to start to change. You start to say, hey, I'm gonna, shift the outfield a little bit. We're gonna, maybe take a few bigger swings at the plate, that sort of thing. So I would say we're really at the phase where we've started to figure out what is and is not working for us based on, you know, changes we made when I got here. Figuring out what new services we've rolled out that are really going to be sticky, and figuring out how to leverage and drive more of those things. And then we're also, I guess the reason I said the bottom of the third, maybe top of the fourth, is once you get into the fourth, right, you're in that kind of the dog days, right? Everyone's had a swing at the plate. You know, you still got 5 or 6 innings left, but it's
You've
kind
also
of
had
long
everybody
part
in the lineup has seen. Excuse me. Everybody in the lineup has seen the pitcher once.
Yeah. And it's kind of the long part of the game, right? Like you're looking forward to the 7th inning stretch. You're looking forward to getting around that curve. So this is the point where you really need to. It becomes more about endurance and adaptability, and making sure that as you have that strategy in place, that the team is ready for what that looks like. Because it is, you kind of lose some of the excitement of, hey, we just rolled out this new service, we just rolled out this new process, to how do we really adhere to that for the rest of the ball game. So yeah, that's where I would say we're at as far as you know, our processes at Feasible.
Yeah, that's great. And love the analogy, by the way. How often do you talk to the salespeople, you yourself?
Daily.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, I am involved very heavily with our sales team. I mean, their success is my success. It's the success of my team. So you know, when I first started at the company, I think, to go back to your slide of you know, finding out where we're missing, right? So I very heavily in my first 90 days, I spent time with our top digital sellers. One of our top digital sellers was one of the first people I met during my interview process. I met with our sales directors and had one-on-ones to figure out, what are clients saying we're doing well? What are they saying they want more of? What is our competition delivering that we're not? And then I built that into my roadmap for services that we built out, for processes that we rolled out, things like that. And then, you know, I'm even involved in Slack channels with some of our sales reps, so I can see the feedback we're getting on campaigns. I can see the questions we're getting asked about optimizations, things like that. Not just because I'm a control freak, I'd like to believe, but also from the aspect of, it helps me anticipate and understand more of what their pains are, what they're seeing as wins and successes. And I think just being involved at that level, it helps them know that myself and my team are really partners that are, you know, we care deeply about their success. And that helps give them bought into, you know, when I want to change a process that maybe seems like it's stepping on their toes a little bit, things like that, they at least know that we have skin in the game as well.
That's great. Yeah, I would encourage everyone in our audience, if you're in a similar position to Joe, just stay close to the salespeople. It's one of the first things I think I mentioned to you when you got here. It's just, you know, it stays close to them as possible. And, you know, I've actually talked to digital folks in similar positions to yours, Joe. And I've said, so how often do you talk to the sales folks? And they said, oh no, they drive me crazy. I let somebody else deal with the salespeople, because I'm producing the technology. I'm like, no, you're missing the boat on that one. So, you know, mentioned earlier also, Joe's background is not specifically B2B, and a lot of it has been in agencies and B2C and consumer and some big brands and stuff like that. We're just wondering, Joe, when you got to B2B, because it would give us who grew up in this world a better perspective. What'd you find? What was surprising?
So I think coming from the B2C space and the agency space, you really don't understand. I mean, relationships always matter, right? But in the B2B space, I'm constantly kind of mind blown of how much and how much relationships matter, and really how deep they go. So sometimes we have sales reps that have had client relationships for 10, 15, 20 years. And so as much as our technology and products matter, those relationships can matter just as much in terms of getting our foot in the door, or even as, you know, there are shifts within other companies, there are people that say, hey, I've worked with, you know, previously Randall Riley, now Feasible. Hey, we worked with them before for 15 years at my last place. I'm starting day one at this new place, and you're going to be the first call that I make.
What a
So
great thing to
really,
hear.
really surprised, you know, at the depth of relationships and how much they matter. Obviously, much longer sales cycle to get someone to buy a data product, things like that, than it is like a bag of chips or a car, like I'm used to back in the day. I would say the other things have been, a lot of times in the B2C or agency space, you would hear like B2B clients are boring, or they don't want to try new things, or there's going to be too much red tape. Honestly, there is so much eagerness for people to be first adopters of new technologies, of new, you know, products, things like that. And then I'm a big ROI guy and a data guy, so I really love that, you know, a lot of the questions that we're getting asked are not just, can we run this campaign? What's going to be the real impact for me? Now that I've gotten these leads, how do I turn that into revenue? Now that I've gotten that revenue, how can I turn that into a upsell and cross-sell opportunity? So to me, I think that has been really eye-opening. And I guess within that, there's so many clients that are willing to be the test case for us. So we've
Yeah.
had pretty open conversations where I've been in pitches and I've said, you're going to be the first people we try this with. And they're like, hey, sign me up. Like, we're going to figure it out. And, you know, we want to be a good partner. And they know that by being the first people, they can really have that first mover advantage, which means so much in the B2B space. I would say even more so than in the B2C space in a lot of ways.
Really, that's fantastic. I guess the final question before we go to other questions, you know, AI, ChatGPT, and all that stuff, and I've become enamored with it, like most people, and really dove into it. And it's obviously taking place. And I mentioned an example of just producing video, producing content, and all that stuff. But what's your view on that for a media data company, and how are you guys using it?
So it's been a game changer, and I'll admit, probably maybe a year and a half ago, so a little bit before I joined Feasible, I remember one of my old employees telling me like, hey, you got to check this out. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. And then he started showing me things he was doing with reporting, and it just kind of blew my mind. And now at Feasible, we're using it in a number of ways. So we've used it pretty consistently around like brainstorming for content creation. We're starting to leverage it more for like client reporting processes and insights, data visualization. Also have some tooling around like customer segmentation, journey mapping, lead scoring, all those things. So not only for our clients, but also, you know, our internal processes, for our sales team, things like that. And then, you know, as we continue to look forward, you know, knowing that we have our own website properties, you know, exploring things like chatbots, content recommendation engines for our website visitors, performance benchmarking tools, things like that. So I would say we're, just as a collective, even outside of our company, I think we're really just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible there. It's very exciting, very, you know, every day it's something new, right? And just figuring out how we're going to, in our own space, be that first mover that really takes advantage of this and uses it in a way that not only empowers our team, but our clients as well.
That's great. It's really exciting, especially where so much of the revenue of Feasible is data or renewable data. I mean, revenue, reoccurring revenue. And that we could do a whole lot of webinar on that alone. But for the folks in the audience, what Joe has done a really good job of is developing the digital platform and then morphing it into closer to the data part of the business, Joe. And I think if going back to the overused baseball analogy, I think that's in the first inning, actually. But there's a lot of growth there, and for Fusible and other companies. So before we go to questions, I just want to thank you again for your time, and loved working with the team and those folks who are watching. Joe has a very interesting job, but also a great set of assets and people and markets to work in, and it's pretty exciting. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So Jake?
Yes. So we had a couple questions here, and I think I'll just go in order of which ones I have them. So the first one we have is, does having separate salespeople for these new products work, or is it better to train existing salespeople on a new product suite?
I can take that, and then you guys jump in. The slide I showed earlier that like everyone's going multi-channel and stuff, and it's all crossed over, and I think it's very difficult to have separate sales forces for those. I would rather have, for lack of a better term, I would like to have a stronger athlete, with a lot of talents in a lot of different areas than just have disciplined ones, because I think it really confuses the customer. But Joe and Emery?
Yeah, so at least what we've seen is we've partnered our sales team with people that have digital expertise. So we have, like I mentioned, relationships are very important. And a lot of times those relationships have been around for, 10, 15, 20 years in a lot of cases. So we want to continue to leverage the best of what we see from our salespeople and align them with strategists, digital account managers, things like that, so that we really get the best of both worlds. So, I think, to use the athlete analogy, like, we need a point guard and we need a center, and we need to run good pick and rolls and throw alley-oops to each other. I'll use that as a chance to plug Marquette as well in the tournament. But I guess the way I would think of it is, at least in our situation, it's really been finding how we can align those two things together to get in a spot that works for the business as a whole.
That's great.
I think, from what we see when we work with publishers across, a variety of different sizes of publisher, everything from very large enterprise organizations like Joe's, down to even smaller organizations. There's a new emerging model around kind of that customer success sort of infrastructure, which we think is really interesting, because we're really seeing more of these multi-channel, long engaged kind of campaign programs that are evolving into always on kind of solutions, and having that customer success infrastructure that's really there to help support that day-to-day insights delivery. What should we be changing? How should we be optimizing? Like, it really becomes the gateway into that nirvana that we've always wanted to be at as B2B publishers, where we're not selling flighted programs, we're selling like solutions that are always on.
Great.
Awesome. Next question I got is kind of a follow-up. What is the adoption rate when you introduce new solutions to a seasoned sales team?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
So I can take a stab at it first. It's obviously a little hard to peg a specific number to it, but in my experience, I think that was the value of having those one-to-ones with my sales team to figure out what it is that they wanted and why they wanted it, and even asking them, like, if I build this for you, who are we going to sell it to and when? It's the same thing as,
what a great question.
If I go and ask my CEO for a new headcount, he's going to ask me, how soon is it going to produce revenue for me? And I think you want to achieve that buy-in ahead of time, because you don't want to, of course, like, waste your resource time on building these things out if it's not going to get sold in. So in general, I would say, like, I can't think of a service that we've rolled out so far that has not produced us new revenue within the first 60 days. And I would even trend that almost closer to 30 days.
Wow.
It's because we're starting off with an understanding of hey, I'm going to create this for you, but as soon as I create this, you need to be getting in front of some customers with it. And so far, that seems to have worked pretty well for us.
That's great. When I was at Cygnus, we did an audit, and about 60% of the new products that were being produced by digital and IT never made it in front of a customer. That's just, it was wasteful. So we turned that upside down and became much more productive.
Awesome. Well, I've got two more questions, and then that'll wrap it all up. But the third one here is this is a good one too. How do I get my private equity owners and managers to embrace this and help pay for the investment in this kind of transition?
I can answer that. Scare the hell out of them. When I'm scared, seriously, it's the ability to walk away from money on the table. We're not built that way. And I said earlier, I said scare the hell out of them. Show them the facts, show them the numbers, show them the market share and where it's going and new platforms. And it's not your company. And make it very simple. And I'm a CEO for a long time, and I'm talking about myself. Make it very simple to say in a paragraph, if we don't do this, our competitors are, and we're going to be walking away from money. And there's a lot more sophisticated ways of saying, I'm sure Anne-Marie and Joe would say it that way, more sophisticated, but the headline to me is scare the hell out of them.
So last one was kind of for Joe. Joe, is there a trend or what kind of backgrounds should we be looking for and considering in our own digital marketing departments?
So what has worked for me, and I guess with our team, has been bringing in a lot of agency talent into our publisher B2B world, because they really understand and have lived, campaigns at depth, as Anne-Marie mentioned, like going from these more one-off campaigns to longer term campaigns or always on sort of things. And I would also say, like, keeping in mind that your buying team is changing. So a lot of times the reason why us having this mix of a salesperson plus a digital expert is a lot of our clients, they may have one point of contact that is the true signer, but their counterpart is somebody that lives and breathes marketing, maybe digital marketing, whatever. And so we needed to have somebody that could match that expertise, that skill set, be able to answer those more pointed questions. And so to us, it's really worked well, is finding people with agency talent and then kind of bringing them over to our world. And then from there, I would say, like, kind of softer skills we look for people that are adaptable, people that want to learn, people that are hungry. I would say probably the same skill set that's going to make a lot of other roles successful.
Mm-hmm.
But especially as you consider how much our space is changing, how much things like AI are changing, what we do with clients, what we do for ourselves. You really have to have people that are open-minded and willing to do some of that outside legwork on their own. So if you're not hungry to learn, it's going to be hard for you to succeed in this space. So hopefully that answered it. That seems to be our recipe for success with our team.
Sounds great. I think that's and I did see some of those marketing people coming in, and they've proven to be highly effective. Your expertise, so it's great. The final thing I would say, Jake, before we go is we're always available afterwards to talk if anybody has any follow-up questions on an individual basis. Number one, and number two, I'd encourage you to go back to that takeaway slide. The message there is speed is key when it comes to your salespeople. If you don't have the right people, get the right people. And if you do think you do, but they're not performing, find out a way to give them confidence to sell these technology products. Because Joe mentioned earlier, some people have been selling to their client 15, 20 years. They learn the technology together as it evolved 15 years ago. And the best of all relationships is the customer learns from the salesperson, not the other way around. So, I would encourage you to take a look at those takeaways, and would love to keep the discussion going with anyone that wants to continue to talk about that. But I appreciate your time and your presence, Joe, and you gave people a real life view of this rather than just, charts and graphs. So, Anne Marie?
No, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Joe for being such a wonderful guest and having such a compelling conversation. Super appreciate you all. Come back here on the fourth Thursday of April, and we'll have another Growth Lab webinar for you then. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.